Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're really plunging headfirst into international construction contracts, specifically those huge, those massive undertakings, dredging and reclamation projects.
And those projects are not just moving dirt around. We're talking about reshaping coastlines, creating land where it didn't exist before, and making sure it stays put against some pretty relentless forces.
It's like, I don't know, architectural Jenga, but with the ocean, right?
Mm.
High stakes, massive scale, and well, the potential for things to get really interesting if the contract isn't rock solid.
And that is where our friend the FESC Blue-Green Book comes in. Formally, it's the form of contract for dredging and reclamation works, but everyone just calls it the Blue-Green Book, the gold standard for international projects in this field.
Okay, so gold standard. Unpack that for us a bit. What's so special about this blue-green book?
Well, I think a lot of people, and they think contracts, they think, oh no, here we go, it's going to be a maze. But this one prides itself on clarity, on a straightforward approach. It uses what's called a single document format. So the offer, the acceptance, it's all in one concise agreement.
So no more like digging through mountains of paperwork to figure out who agreed to what.
Exactly. It streamlines that whole initial agreement process, so less confusion, less chance of disputes down the line.
Sounds efficient, but I'm guessing the devil's in the details.
You're on your game today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the agreement itself, it's concise, but then there's the appendix. That's where the meat is, the real nitty-gritty, project-specific details, payment schedules, how to deal with unexpected hiccups, all of that.
Speaking of hiccups, I imagine transparency's got to be huge in these projects. You don't want to discover a hidden underwater cave halfway through dredging a shipping channel or something.
Absolutely. And the Blue-Green Book, it tackles this head-on, a big emphasis on upfront information exchange, especially when it comes to site conditions.
So no burying their heads in the sand, so to speak.
No way. It's very clear. The employer, they're responsible for giving the contractor all available site investigation data, hydrological surveys, geotechnical reports, environmental assessments, the works.
Makes sense. But what happens if, even with all that data, the contractor hits something unexpected, like they're dredging, and bam, a layer of bedrock that wasn't on the surveys?
That's where the difference between providing data and interpreting it comes in. The employer hands it all over, yes, but the contractor, they're the ones responsible for making sense of it, incorporating it into their work plan.
So it's shared responsibility, but with a clear division of who does what.
Exactly. The Blue-Green Book, it recognizes both parties have a role in the project's success.
And it's not just the employer and the contractor calling all the shots either, is it?
Yeah.
We got to have the engineer in the mix as well.
Oh, yeah, the engineer, absolutely crucial. They're like that neutral third party, there to make sure the whole project follows the contract's rules, that everything is up to spec.
So, referees of the dredging world, making sure everyone plays fair.
That's a great way to put it. They review the contractor's plans, they keep an eye on progress. If there are any disagreements between the employer and contractor, they step in as mediators.
Sounds like a pretty important job. I bet they earned their keep.
You can say that again, but the Blue-Green Book is good at laying out their responsibilities, how they make decisions, all of that. Helps keep things running smoothly, even when, the seas get rough, metaphorically speaking.
And what about other players, subcontractors? How are they handled in the Blue-Green Book?
Very specific rules about that. Basically, it boils down to the contractor being on the hook for their subcontractor's work, just as if they'd done it themselves.
So it's like a chain of responsibility, making sure everyone is accountable for their piece of the project.
Precisely. No room for ambiguity with the Blue-Green Book when it comes to responsibility.
And speaking of responsibility, I'd imagine time management is a pretty big deal in these projects, right? I mean, we're talking about massive undertakings, often at the mercy of Mother Nature.
Oh, absolutely. Delays equal big costs in this game, so keeping things on schedule is critical. And that's where the Blue-Green Book has this interesting approach, using what it calls sections to break the project down into more manageable bits.
Sections, what are those?
So instead of one big deadline for the whole project, the Blue-Green Book says we're dividing the work into these distinct sections, each with its own mini deadline.
Like breaking a marathon into smaller, easier to stomach intervals.
Exactly. So each section, it's a defined chunk of the project. And the contract, it outlines what happens if there are delays within that section, the consequences, all of that.
Sounds like a pretty smart way to keep things moving.
Mm.
But what happens when, those unforeseen circumstances pop up, as they always seem to do? This is a dynamic environment. Tides, weather, who knows what's lurking down there on the seabed.
Right, you're working with nature, so you have to expect the unexpected. And the Blue-Green Book, it does anticipate that. It addresses it through something called defined risks.
Defined risks sounds ominous.
Not really. Think of it like the contract acknowledging that some stuff is beyond anyone's control. Extreme weather, you run into unexpected ground conditions, even force majeure, things that disrupt the project, but neither the employer nor the contractor are at fault.
Okay, so like a built-in contingency plan for those oh no moments.
Exactly. And it lays out specifically how those defined risks are handled. If a section deadline needs to be extended because of one, how any cost overruns are dealt with, all of that.
So fairness and flexibility in the face of the unexpected.
Exactly right. The Blue-Green Book gets that these projects, they come with inherent unpredictability, and it provides a way to navigate that to protect both parties involved.
This is fascinating stuff. We've covered who's involved, how the contract deals with time management, unexpected events.
Huh.
But what about everyone's favorite topic? Money.
Ah, yes, the financial side of things. And the Blue-Green Book doesn't disappoint. It offers a surprising amount of flexibility when it comes to how payments are made.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more.
Some contracts, they lock you into one rigid payment structure, but this one, it outlines several different valuation methods, each one with its own pluses and minuses, so the employer and contractor can choose what suits them best for the project.
Not a one-size-fits-all approach, then.
Not at all. You've got your classic lump sum, where the price is decided up front, and then more adaptable ones like remeasurement and cost plus, good for projects where the scope of work might change as you go.
And which one's best probably depends on the project itself, right? How much uncertainty there is.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot between predictability and being able to adapt, and the Blue-Green Book gives you the tools to do just that. This is all incredibly insightful. But before we get any deeper into the financial aspects, I think it's a good time for a quick break. We'll be right back to uncover more about how the FATI Blue-Green Book keeps these massive dredging and reclamation projects afloat.
You know, one thing I've always found interesting about the Blue-Green Book is how it handles this idea of retention money, which, let's be honest, not usually the most riveting part of a contract.
Retention money, you mean that portion of the payment that's held back until the project's all wrapped up? Yeah, not exactly the most thrilling topic. How does the Blue-Green Book make it exciting?
Oh, it's not about excitement, more like recognizing the realities of dredging work. Think about it. You're the contractor. You've dredged this massive channel, but there's a tiny defect somewhere. You can't exactly just pour that seabed back in, can you?
We're talking serious amounts of earth here, not a simple fix.
Exactly. So the Blue-Green Book, it gets that. It differentiates between retention money for the dredging itself versus, say, building a pier on top of that new land you created. Dredging retention, it's usually released sooner, often when you hit the taking over certificate stage.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Financial security, but also the practicalities of underwater construction.
Precisely. Highlights how this contract's tailored to this specific industry, you know. But let's say, even with the best planning, a disagreement crops up between the employer and contractor. What then?
Yeah, nobody wants a full-blown courtroom battle every time there's a bump in the road. How does the Blue-Green Book handle dispute resolution?
That's actually one of the strong points. It's very clear about the process, and the priority is always on resolving things swiftly but fairly. First line of defense is something called a dispute adjudication board, DAB for short.
DAB. Sounds more like a dance move than a contractual clause.
Maybe, but a lot more effective than a dance-off when you've got millions on the line. Basically, the DIB, it's a panel, 1 to 3 experts, neutral parties. They look at the dispute, the evidence, and issue a decision.
And that DIB decision, that's it. Set in stone.
Depends. If the employer and contractor both agreed beforehand to be bound by the DIB's ruling, then yeah, it's final. But the Blue-Green Book also knows that sometimes you need another level. In those cases, they can go to arbitration.
Arbitration, that sounds a bit more serious.
It is a step up, formality-wise. But the Blue-Green Book, it guides you through that too. How are arbitrators chosen? What rules do they follow? The goal is to make it as painless as possible. Remember, the project needs to get back on track, and that means a fair, fast resolution.
Like having a roadmap for navigating choppy waters.
Yeah.
So we've covered who's involved, the timeline, the money, even what happens if people disagree. But for our listeners who are now thinking, hey, I want to be a dredging contract expert, where do they even begin?
That's the million-dollar question. Honestly, we've given a good overview here, but the Blue-Green Book itself, it's like a fine wine meant to be sipped slowly appreciated.
No chugging the whole contract in one go, then.
Not recommended. Best explored with some legal counsel by your side. They can guide you through the specifics because every project's different, every location, every employer-contractor relationship, there are always unique factors.
Like, you wouldn't try to bake a cake just by reading the title of the recipe, right? You want the ingredients, the steps, those little tips and tricks.
Exactly. And in the same way, a well-baked cake brings joy. A well-understood, well-executed blue-green book contract, that's the difference between a dredging project that succeeds and one that gets bogged down in disputes and delays.
Speaking of success, any closing thoughts for our listeners as we start to wrap up our deep dive here?
It's easy to get lost in the weeds, all those clauses and technicalities. But at the heart of it, these projects, they're about people.
Oh, absolutely. Behind all the legal stuff, you've got teams of people, different backgrounds, different expertise, all coming together to make these huge feats of engineering happen. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. And the Blue-Green Book, it does a good job, lays out the rules, but it also subtly encourages this spirit of collaboration, respect between the employer and contractor.
Right. Because even with the challenges, and let's face it, there are always disagreements in projects this big, being able to communicate openly, to have that shared understanding of the end goal, that's huge.
Couldn't agree more. You want that environment where both sides can speak up, offer solutions, work through those inevitable, bumps in the road, or maybe ripples in the water, more appropriate for dredging.
Ripples in the water. I like that. Much better. So as we reach the shore of our deep dive here into the FIDI Blue-Green Book, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I'd say this. The Blue-Green Book, it's more than just a contract. It's a framework for successful dredging and reclamation. Provides that strong foundation for clear communication, for managing risk, and if you need it, a way to resolve disputes fairly.
Kicks the guesswork out of those what-if scenarios, which, let's be honest, those can make or break you on a project this size.
Exactly. Both the employer, the contractor, they go in knowing the rules of the game so they can focus their energy on what matters, building something incredible together.
Well said. And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dives into the world of the FI Blue-Green Book.
A pleasure, as always.
The pleasure was all ours. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on the journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, whether you're building on land or reshaping the coastline, a well-crafted contract, it's the anchor for a truly successful endeavor.